Ruth Morgan woke to the dog losing its mind at the back door. It was the kind of barking that meant something was wrong, not a stray cat or a passing car. When she opened the door, her husband was standing there, swaying like he'd been dropped on the porch and told to find his way in. One shoe was gone. A plastic handcuff was cinched around his ankle, and his wrists were bound together with another set. His face looked swollen, his eyes glassy and unfocused. When Ruth asked what happened, Chuck lifted his cuffed hands and tapped his throat, as if the words were trapped there. Ruth tried to pull him inside and reach for the phone, but he kept shaking his head. She asked if he could write. He nodded. She ran for a notepad and pen and put them in his hands. The words came out in a jagged scrawl. He wrote that his throat had been painted with a hallucinogenic drug. He wrote that the drug could destroy his nervous system, drive him irreversibly insane, or kill him. He wrote that calling a doctor or the police would be signing a death warrant for her and the girls. Ruth read it twice, then looked at him and realized he wasn't bargaining. He was terrified. Charles Chuck Morgan was 39, an escrow company owner in Tucson, Arizona, a husband and father of 4 daughters. He was the kind of man who worked with signatures and sealed envelopes, with transfers that required discretion and trust. On March 22, 1977, he left home and drove 2 of his daughters to school. He dropped them off. After that, he vanished. For 3 days, there was nothing. No call, no note, no trace of where he'd gone or who might have taken him. Ruth tried to keep the house steady while her mind ran every road out of Tucson. Then, at around 2 a.m. on March 25th, Chuck was suddenly back at the door, cuffed and unable to speak. Ruth wanted help. Chuck would not allow it. He was adamant, even as he trembled and struggled to swallow. Ruth stayed with him, watched him sweat through the night, and over the next week nursed him until his voice began to return. As he recovered, the story got stranger. Before he could speak normally, he started writing hints about a second life Ruth had never heard of. He wrote that they had taken his treasury identification. He claimed he'd been working for the federal government for 2 or 3 years. Ruth had never seen an ID like that. Chuck was a cautious businessman who didn't share details of his work at home. Ruth later said he'd warned her that the less she and the girls knew, the safer they would be. In the 1970s, Arizona had a reputation as a place organized crime could use, a pipeline for narcotics, a haven for money laundering, a market where land and trusts could hide ownership. Chuck's escrow work put him in contact with people who wanted transactions handled quietly. Investigators and journalists later said he'd done escrow work tied to mob figures and suspicious bullion deals, paper transactions that could help wash money clean. Whatever Chuck truly knew, he acted like a man who believed he'd gotten too close to something he couldn't control. After the kidnapping, Chuck changed the way he lived. He wore a bulletproof vest. He insisted on being the one to drive his daughters to and from school. He watched the street longer before he stepped outside. Ruth watched him become a man who expected a car to slow down at the curb, expected footsteps behind him in a parking lot, expected the next warning to be the last. Then, 2 months after he stumbled home in plastic cuffs, he vanished again. This time he didn't return after 3 days. Ruth waited for the thump at the door, for the sound of his key, for anything that meant he was still alive. 9 days after he disappeared, the phone rang. A woman asked for Ruthie. She said Chuck was all right, then gave her a Bible reference, Ecclesiastes 12, verses 1 through 8. Then she hung up. Ruth opened a Bible and read about terrors on the road, about the silver cord breaking and the golden bowl being crushed, about dust returning to the earth and the spirit returning to God. The passage felt like a message, but not one she could decode. All she knew was that a stranger wanted her to read it, and a stranger wanted her to believe Chuck still had a chance. 2 days later, Chuck Morgan's body was found in the desert outside Tucson, near Sells, alongside his car on a dirt road. He was wearing his bulletproof vest. He had been shot once at close range in the back of the head. The bullet was fired from his own .357 Magnum, which was found nearby. Investigators noted details that made the scene hard to accept at face value. The gun was reported to be devoid of fingerprints. There was gunshot residue on Chuck's left hand. Inside the car, sheriff's investigators found ammunition, multiple weapons, and several sets of handcuffs. They also found a tooth wrapped in tissue and a pair of sunglasses that did not belong to Chuck. Investigators noted that the car had been modified so it could be unlocked from the fender. The most chilling detail was pinned to his underwear, directions to the spot, written in Chuck's handwriting, along with a $2 bill. On the bill were 7 names and the same Bible citation the caller had given Ruth. A rough map was drawn on it, pointing toward an area between Tucson and Mexico, near places known for smuggling. It looked like a trail of breadcrumbs left on purpose, but it wasn't clear who had arranged them, Chuck, his killer, or both. Then the woman who called herself Green Eyes surfaced. She contacted police and said she knew Chuck. She claimed she had seen him after he disappeared, before he died. According to her, Chuck showed her a briefcase filled with cash and told her he was trying to buy off a hitman who had been hired to kill him. She described a contract on his life for $90,000, increasing by $5,000 a day. Investigators were able to corroborate that she and Chuck had met by reviewing surveillance footage that placed them together at a South Side hotel. As detectives dug, more threads appeared. Chuck's attorney, Ronald J. Newman, confirmed that Chuck had testified in a secret state investigation involving Tucson's Banco International de Arizona and a former director, David Cayley. Arizona Attorney General Bruce Babbitt confirmed an investigation was being conducted for the banking department and that Chuck had been called to testify about internal dealings he knew about, even if he wasn't directly involved. In the aftermath, the case did not quiet down. Chuck's impounded car was broken into while in police custody. His office was ransacked. Weeks later, 2 men claiming to be FBI agents showed up at the Morgan home and searched it. Each incident left Ruth with the same feeling she'd had at the back door that first night, that someone still wanted whatever Chuck had been carrying, and that the people circling this story weren't done. Despite the oddities, authorities ruled Chuck Morgan's death a suicide, and the case was closed on August 10, 1977. Ruth never accepted it. Her husband had been wearing body armor because he believed someone wanted him dead. He had vanished twice. He had returned once bound and drugged, unable to speak. He had died with a bullet in the back of his head and clues pinned to his body like deliberate props. Decades later, the center of the story remains the same lonely dirt road and the same impossible question. If Chuck was telling the truth about federal work, who was he working for, and what did he know? If he was entangled in corruption and criminal money, who decided he couldn't walk away? And if he tried to buy his way out of a contract killing, who took the money and who made sure he never got another chance? Thank you for listening to The Lantern's Tale. Subscribe for more true stories, if you dare.